On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Kaustav. He is the Group Director of Analytics and Reporting at IPG Media Brands. We're going to be talking about asking the right questions, especially as an analytics leader. We're going to talk about what that means with his stakeholders, because obviously the intent and meaning could shift if you're not asking the right questions. Also, we're going to talk about how data and analytics is becoming more conversational. We'll see how far we get. Kaustav, thanks for being on the show.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Amir. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. All right. Before we start, tell everyone what IPG Media Brands does.
So IPG Media Brands is really a holding company, and it's a media company that helps reach target audiences for various kinds of companies in sectors like consumer, healthcare, and so on and so forth. So we have a huge portfolio of clients in health, in consumer, and we really work with them to reach their target markets within the US and globally.
All right. So we're going to be talking about asking the right question. Actually, I think this is one of the most complicated parts within analytics, because what path you lead somebody down, the types of question you ask can result in completely different dynamics. And as well, the stakeholder is the subject matter expert, but they're going to answer the questions based on, where we're leading them. And let's talk about that. As an analytics leader, asking the right questions, and I know this is very subjective. There's no science behind this. But when you approach stakeholders and you're talking to them and you're trying to go through your due diligence and ask them the questions, gather requirements, where do you see or how do you feel there could be a better or a worse question to ask when you're prompting them for requirements?
It's very interesting. And as you said, it's one of the most complex parts of my work, who really looks at strategy, not really from an analytics point of view, but a business problem point of view. What is the client trying to do? What is the organization trying to do? And then within the organization's team, what the team I'm working with is trying to do. And that often tends to be brand teams. So it's a matter of thinking through what kind of goals they are looking for at a short term and long term, considering their budgets, and so forth, so on and so forth. And often these clients are working with multiple stakeholders, not just internal, but external, right? We work with partner agencies, creative agencies. There are other people looking at data. There's data science agencies. And sometimes there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen. So cutting through all of that is really a strong foundation in understanding what the business is. And the way I approach it is really simple. It's really as if you're talking to a young person on what their goals are, right? It's distilling down to very basic principles on, if I knew something, what would I do with that? So often what helps in doing that, and I try to encourage with my clients, is when I'm talking to them over calls or in workshops, is asking those kind of questions and them thinking through, irrespective of what is available, if they knew something, what kind of decisions they would like to take. And often that leads to really deeper questions. And I take all of those questions and then prioritize them to then what is available, what are easier to do with what is available. And then the other spectrum is what are some pipe dreams. But that organization really helps them understand, okay, what I can action now and what is the budget for now that can be actioned, and then what more can I ask for from leadership, and so on and so forth. So it trickles down there, but it's really getting on a call, asking those fundamental questions: the who is this impacting, what is at stake, when does it need to happen, where are we executing some of our plans, and why. The why is a big question. So the 4 W's and the how. So that's the fundamental of it, and I still think that really works wonders when we talk about those fundamentals.
Absolutely. Well, let me ask you this question, because I think this is a part of every technologist process, and I ask this question because I'm very curious as to if we're helping or hurting. I think a lot of technologists, when they're going through the requirements, are trying to go through those questions you just alluded to. They're also in parallel, while they're processing it and taking those questions, start trying to solve the technical problem in real time. I feel like it's a switch that goes on. You hear the problem, and I'm sure if you went to a builder and you said, I want to build a deck to my house. As soon as you say that, he's starting to think about the beams, and he's thinking about the challenges he has to overcome in his world. And he probably starts tuning out the colors or what I need. As technologists, it's common. We do it. Does that help us, or does that potentially hurt us when we're trying to nail down the business driver and get down to the user's level?
Wow, that's a great question, and that's something I struggle with all the time, to find that balance of building the plane while flying it, right? And then that happens a lot in this fast-paced environment. Like, we're getting so many requests at a very high velocity, and there's so much data available and information available for us, and we're overwhelmed to deliver on time, because that then there are repercussions if you don't. And why spend time on explaining why it may get delayed versus just doing something and waiting for a reaction? So that's the balance. But I want to quote what Albert Einstein said something here, right? So what he quoted, and that resonates a lot with me, is, if I were to chop a tree down, I would spend 55 minutes just sharpening my blade. If I were to chop a tree down in an hour, right? So I will spend majority of my time just sharpening my blade, right? So I think that's what you're alluding to. Like, how much time do we allocate in planning, thinking through what the output is, and then workshopping, versus just beginning to build it and then realizing, oops, that's not what the client wanted at the first place.
Yeah, it's interesting, because I think when you're talking about the intent of the stakeholder, and I think sometimes I don't have the studies and metrics, I'm not going to quote them, but I know there's a high percentage of technology projects are not successful, right? There's some obscene number where you kind of look at that and go, that's just crazy. A lot of smart people, and we don't deliver, I think, what is it, 30-40% success rate, 60-70% failure rate. And that's actually what made me start thinking about this intent. And you mentioned, obviously the great quote of spend 55 minutes sharpening your blade. And I don't know how we change that or shift that, or maybe we're not aware, because I am no longer hands-on. So I'm sitting further back, and I'm looking in, and I'm like, oh, this is an interesting thing I used to do. And I still do it in other things that, my wife asked me. And I'm starting to think, how do you actually go, hey, you know what? I'm just going to be present to listen to the problem, sharpen that axe, and then go see if there is even a technology move that I need to make, or potentially it's just all process, and I'm starting to run and build. I guess when it comes to that balance of going, you know what, I'm going to focus on, can I just solve the process for them, versus it's going to be a technology solution. How do we work on improving that?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I must say that's a learning that I've come to understand with experience, and with working with leadership who've had that experience. And every time I've come up with an innovative idea saying, hey, let's do this, and the client is asking for an AI solution. And my leader would ask, why? Why do they need, and what is the vision, and what is the goal, and how do you know that it's an AI problem versus just I don't know, a very simple, I'm oversimplifying this, but maybe just a communication problem and some Excel pivot tables at the back end, or whatever, a SQL Server solution versus a big Snowflake thing. Yeah, and that's the question as consultants we need to ask. As those generalists, we need to ask the client, why? And we need to keep asking until we get to the real meat of the problem. And yes, I mean there are multiple ways of approaching this, but I think that's where an organization's DNA is very helpful. The client's organization's DNA, and even as the agency or the consulting firm that they're working with, their DNA on whether just to hear something, pick up and run with it, or really have the experience to ask those whys and get to until the fifth why, where you really get to the problem, which may be solved, which could be very simply solved. So yeah, that's where the experience counts. And I think it's critical to invest in those people and processes who've done this churn.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think if you were to, I guess, if you were to look at your experience dealing with stakeholders, if you were to identify maybe, I mean, do you have a tip or trick that's worked for you? I mean, you don't have to share if you don't want to, but is there something that, you use to help draw, I know you mentioned obviously ask the questions, but obviously for them to relate to the problem the way you need it, is there a tip or trick that's worked well for you to kind of get them to think down the reasoning or path that you're hoping them to?
Yeah, especially when working with clients, just clarity on what the goal is, asking that first, right? But that's really the framework that helps create those work streams, helps the client visualize, okay, this is our current state of the process, and this is what ideal looks like. And how do we get to that? So that's when you create something called a roadmap. So PTP, that's the framework. Then you create a roadmap, and then you create a timeline. And kind of these three broadly really help clients to, take it and run with it, go to their leadership, make decisions around, and ask for data then from us. But that creates a strong foundation between a consultant or consulting agency and the client.
Absolutely. I guess, you mentioned Gen AI, and I guess as we're starting to see tools develop, and we can only imagine more tools are going to be developed. I guess the nature of some of these tools, obviously they're very, as we see them now, they can be conversational. I think everyone would love analytics to be more conversational, because I think a lot of people want to prompt in a specific way. How do you kind of, and I know obviously we're kind of looking in the future, we're not going to hold you to your views, but as you kind of see analytics being conversational and you see some of these tools, is that going to help us in terms of, you mentioned obviously the requirements and making sure we're delivering and delivering higher degrees of success on projects. Do you think that's going to help us actually get there?
I don't know the answer to that,
Fair.
honestly.
Fair? No, it's fair.
Yeah, but let's take a step back on how that space is evolving. And I've seen certain organizations that were first movers, like I think ThoughtSpot is one of those organizations that claims that BI is dead, right? And claims that, hey, once we get your data, we just need to talk to a chatbot, and all the questions that you ask your BI analyst, your analytics team can be answered through that chatbot. So what it is really doing is making those brand owners, decision makers within the organizations own their decisions, and putting a lot of the onus on them, right? So that's what is really happening. But I can't really put myself into a brand, a decision maker's shoe when they have a budget to spend, right? That different brand teams, etc., technology teams and product managers can react differently. Some are tech savvy, and some would love that option to, hey, I have control over my insights and I can get my answers at 2 a.m. in the night. So that's what that enablement is doing, versus speaking to a consultant, right, who also has the industry experience, has worked in multiple industries over time and understands the evolution. That's the difference really in the product offering. But it is evolving. There are multiple models now, there are multiple tools now that can tap into a data and answer, at least at a basic level, give you answers that, okay, what are trends like? But again, it boils back to asking those questions and the experience of asking those questions. Even what you ask the chatbots would come from that experience. And the chatbot is likely to learn to give you smarter answers over time. So yeah, it's a space I'm watching. It's a space that I'm learning about, I'm reading about, and hey, like every second new innovation is coming to the market, like DeepSeek, how that you may have heard of that, right? How DeepSeek changed the ecosystem of AI, Gen AI. So yeah, definitely some as technologists we should keep an eye on.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's 100%. I think we're still all pretty much guessing as to where things are headed and where the future lies, in a variety of different perspectives. So 100% agree with you. Way too soon to know. I guess when you're kind of looking at, we've been talking about asking the right questions and really working with your stakeholders. And obviously you've mentioned like clarity is exceptionally important. That's something you try to establish early on. Within the process of analytics, I know obviously, on the software engineering side, Scrum is huge to bring in stakeholders to keep them apprised of what's happening. I know we've tried similar with data. I'm not sure if it's a natural flow or fit, but when you're talking about that process with the stakeholder, showing them those incremental improvements, what have you seen help?
So depending on the question, the question we are trying to address with data, right? One of the key questions in media analytics is, what is my ROI? What is my return on investment? And that it's not an easy question to answer, because a firm is really spending millions of dollars on all kinds of marketing channels, including some that are not very easily measurable. So to bring that together, that becomes just conveying to the client, talking to the client about how that is that takes a lot of time to do, what the process for that is, and how that can be kind of done like once or twice a year where it's more relevant, and that's how you should do it. So that's one question, but there are leading indicators that help understand ROI and that correlate strongly with ROI. So that's where we establish a more regular cadence on, hey, this is the measurement framework that we will use for the year to measure each channel, and depending on your goal, we assign these KPIs to that goal. Like, be it, okay, if your goal is driving awareness, then hey, how do you measure awareness? Through surveys is one instrument, and there are of course digital KPIs that help measure awareness, and so that whole piece. And then we provide industry benchmarks, right? So benchmarks is a keyword here. Provide industry benchmarks. It's also important to contextualize with self-benchmarking, because a brand that is new to market could be treated very differently from a brand that has been in market for a long time. And of course, depending on the size and on the market area, blue ocean versus red ocean strategy. So a lot of things to keep in context when deciding those KPIs, and then socializing and helping the clients understand that. So a lot of my work, it goes into that, thinking through that and help and talk through that, the life cycle of measurement.
Absolutely. No, I mean, I think those are all valid points. And I think it's, I think this is a lot more art than it is science. I don't think there's a particular science behind what we're talking about. I think it's a lot of art. I think it's a lot of careful asking of these questions. I think it's been great to kind of hear your views, because I think every leader out there, this is where you win or lose. I don't think you win or lose on the tech. I think you win or lose up front. And I appreciate you coming on and sharing with us and providing your insights. If somebody wants to reach out to you to carry on the conversation, because obviously I'm sure we haven't covered everything in the topic, what's a good way of connecting with you?
I think the best way of connecting with me is over LinkedIn.
Okay. All right. We'll put that link in the show notes so people can find you. And again, Kaustav, thank you for coming on. Thank you for sharing.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Amir, for inviting me.
Absolutely. All right. That's it for this episode. Be back again. Different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. I think, we had Kaustav talk to us about, especially with the stakeholders, asking the right questions, helping them navigate down the channels to get to the requirements that he needs for his team to deliver the analytics and the solutions they're looking for. And it's always not maybe technology, but it sometimes is. And I think that's where we need to balance our views. I think he had some great insights in terms of what he does on his day-to-day to deliver. And I appreciate that. And please share this episode with somebody else who might find it beneficial. That'd be fantastic. If you could, like, subscribe, comment, let me know how the podcast is going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.